"Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the human mind." This phrase lies at the heart of Dune Prophecy, which is a series all about highlighting the dangers of artificial intelligence, something that a lot of us can relate to these days. Set 150 years after the Great Machine Wars, aka the Butlerian Jihad, the mere sight of an AI lizard sent some of the most powerful people in the Imperium into a panicked frenzy. While it might feel like an overreaction at first, they have good reason to be apprehensive. The annihilation of the thinking machine threat unified humanity in a way that seemed almost unprecedented. An intergalactic species with cultures and traditions more diverse than the ones on our planet focused on achieving a single goal. Once they'd achieved that goal, humanity needed a way forward that would ensure such a threat could never rise again. And that way was the Orange Catholic Bible. Officially called the Koranjiyana Zenchristian Scriptures, this document is an amalgamation of every major religious text in the Dune-iverse, and is the reason the Imperium stands as united as it does. So consider this to be your official spoiler warning, because in this video we'll take a deep dive into the OCB and explain what its key phrases mean for this series. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. Now, this is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Why is the Orange Catholic Bible called that? How was it created? The topic of religion in Dune is surprisingly not as contentious as one might think, because for most of its relevant timeline, there was only one. Officially speaking, that is. The Tleilaxu worship their hidden gods on their home planet. The Fremen of Arrakis worship the sandworms as manifestations of their maker. But the rest of the universe prayed to a single god, enshrined within the verses of the Orange Catholic Bible. This document is perhaps the most radical piece of literature ever produced in the history of Dune, or indeed of all fiction, because it managed to do something no other religion has: achieve near total religious syncretism. The Orange Catholic Bible's name itself is indicative of this, as it's thought to be derived from the Loyal Orange Institution, a staunchly Protestant arm of Christianity that originated because of the Protestant British monarch William of Orange. William deposed King James II and VII during the Great Revolution that consolidated Protestantism's hold over England, Scotland, and Ireland. Nearly a century after his death, Ulster Protestants created the Orange Order to protect and defend the rights that William won for them during the Armagh disturbances. Despite the United Kingdom being a largely Protestant country by the time James came into power, he himself was a staunch Catholic. He used Protestant support to gain power, and then had his successor baptized to ensure that the next British monarch after him would be a Catholic as well. The Orange Order is in clear opposition to Catholicism, as demonstrated by their principal commandment of defending the king and his heirs so long as he or they support the Protestant ascendancy. But this also proves just how revolutionary the Orange Catholic Bible is. It managed to merge over 10,000 different intergalactic religious and faiths into a single 1,800-page document that upholds the one tenet all world religions seem to agree on: thou shalt not disfigure the soul. Now, we know what we said about the core philosophy of Dune Prophecy in our introduction, but trust us, this phrase figures into the whole thinking machine ban as well, because it was human hubris that led to a handful of people to experiment with immortality, which eventually resulted in the rise of the machine. Around 1300 years before the Spacing Guild officially changed the way the universe worked, humanity was in a state of stagnation. It had branched out into the universe, but humanity's over-reliance on machinery had made them complacent. So, a man called Andrew Skouros took matters into his own hands and endeavored to change the universe. He started calling himself Agamemnon, and with the support of a few like-minded individuals, as well as being a brilliant scientist, he started the Age of Titans. Titans were nothing more than humans that had artificially extended their lifespan by becoming hybrid machine beings called Cymex. Agamemnon went on to live for well over 1,000 years because he discarded his human body, and this became the root cause of the Butlerian Jihad, in a way. Because the Titans wanted to wrest control of humanity away from the old empire, they ended up creating an artificial intelligence program that would outwit their less technologically advanced enemies. But when one of them ended up giving the AI too much control over governance, the AI took control of its masters and kick-started the Age of the Thinking Machine. This AI program went on to take the name Omnius. In 1,000 years, it destroyed and oppressed humanity every chance it got. The system of trustees, humans who were loyal to the machine empire and kept other human slaves in line, was one of Omnius's worst propagations. But to him, it all made sense. Agamemnon ended up becoming enslaved by the very program he used to claim victory, and none of this would have happened had he not endeavored to mutilate his own soul. In the Dune-iverse, the geriatric spice melange is a natural lifespan-increasing drug. Regular consumers of spice can end up living for close to 3 centuries. But this is because of the way spice fortifies the human immune system. It naturally prolongs life, whereas Agamemnon pretty much threw away his entire humanity, save for his brain. So once the Titans and the thinking machines were finally extinguished during the Battle of Corinth, humanity collectively felt the need for a great change. Billions of human deaths caused the leaders of the world to realize that if the threat of thinking machines was to ever be prevented from recurring, it needed to be hard-coded into the human genome. It needed to be a lesson so great that humans never again tried to enslave other humans with the use of machine. Once, men turned their thinking over to machines in the hope that this would set them free, but that only permitted other men with machine to enslave them. If it had to be done, let it be done through strength, not because a machine decided that it was superior creatures of God. We say this because we know that House Harkonnen in the main timeline was infamous for using slaves in its industrial complex, and that was them flouting the rules with the Emperor's implicit consent. People needed to unite under one school of thought. It was decided that to achieve this, every single piece of religious document that was in the known universe needed to be melded into one. It was the biggest experiment in religious syncretism in any real or fictional world, and it was born out of the necessity to make mankind evolve beyond their baser thoughts and desires. For 7 years, the Commission of Ecumenical Translators labored over fusing all the religions in the known universe into a single universal doctrine that ensured mankind never bowed down to machines again. That doctrine was the Orange Catholic Bible, and it contains wisdom from a variety of Dune's fictional faith. The Maya-Mithsari, Mahayana Christianity, all Bud-Islamic traditions, including the Zen-Sunni faith, Frank Herbert built fusions upon fusions to produce the ultimate religious document of his world, whose core commandment was, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul." If humans had to destroy themselves, if they were going to be prone to malice and oppression, then let that come from the human mind and body, not the cold metal logic of machines. You of fearful heart, be strong and fear not. Behold, your God will come with a vengeance. He will come and save you from the worshippers of machine. The Orange Catholic Bible represented the pinnacle of unified religious and human thought in the Dune-iverse, and though it faced resistance in its early years, it clearly became the norm of the world by the time Paul Atreides was born. Several characters like Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck regularly quote the Orange Catholic Bible in the novel. The book Dr. Yueh gifts Paul in the first Villeneuve movie is the OCB, and sisters Dorothea and Emmeline from Dune Prophecy are staunch fanatics of its faith. Slowly but surely, the Orange Catholic Bible's message of not disfiguring the human soul and avoiding the creation of thinking machines spread throughout the known universe. Of course, there were those who denied its truth and resisted its teachings, but that's to be expected with any kind of religion, especially one operating at such a grand scale. For the most part, the OCB accomplished what it set out to do, and that was force humans to think beyond the use and fear of machinery. Only God can make living, sentient creatures. There are many genetic programs in Dune that brazenly go against this commandment of the OCB, especially the ones being run by the Tleilaxu and the Bene Gesserit. But even they avoid using artificial intelligence to create their breeding program. They use roundabout ways to defy the Orange Catholic Bible, but never so blatantly as the Ixians would. Now, that's a topic for a whole other video, but let's shift gears to discussing the actual content of the OCB and how much it draws from real-world scriptures, because it does that a lot. Every real-world religious reference in the Orange Catholic Bible. There are several quotes from the Bible and the Quran that Frank Herbert appropriated and recontextualized for his series. Let's start with the creation of the world from the book of Genesis. The second chapter of Genesis tells us that after spending 6 days creating the universe, God rested on the 7th day, and thus was it sanctified as the Sabbath, the day God rested. Usually, this is taken as a message of recuperation and the importance of slowing down, but in Dune, it's used by a Bene Gesserit sister in reference to the sisterhood's constant struggle and great work. In Heretics of Dune, Reverend Mother Dawi Atreides thinks to herself of the 7th day as she makes her way to her last meeting with the Mother Superior before she departs for Arrakis. This quote pops into her mind as she thinks of the inviolable nature of time, and once it does, she sarcastically thinks that good on God for taking rest on the 7th day. They all deserved such a thing once their labors were over. The irony in this is that the Bene Gesserit's labors never seem to get over. Heretics of Dune is set over 5,000 years after the time of Paul Atreides, and despite failing to produce a controllable Kwisatz Haderach, the Sisterhood still wants to control the universe. Their philosophy towards power, politics, and who should be in control of it has remained surprisingly consistent, despite them being proven wrong and being put on the brink of extinction so many times. It's a commentary on the thankless nature of the Sisterhood's ultimate goal, which is to bring humanity under their control. But as you might have learned from the life of Muad'Dib, it's human nature to defy control and claim one's freedom. So, ultimately, the Bene Gesserit labor towards proving a moot point. Dawi O'Drady, being a Reverend Mother, knows just how tedious and repetitive the flow of time and its language can be for a prescient being. Yet she's different from her sisters in that she at least retains a sense of awe about the whole thing. She thinks to herself that while the flow of time might be different on different planets, seconds were still seconds, minutes were still minutes, a standard year was still a standard year, and a week was a week. God spent 7 sacred days creating the world, and the Bene Gesserit aim to be in control of a version of him in heretics, at least by the time the novel ends. Even that aspect of them is about bringing the future and fate itself to heel, which is why they never succeed. The Sisterhood's maxim of ultimate control goes against the very truth that life by nature is unpredictable and longs for independence. Thus does Herbert comment on the nature of resting in his work and integrates it within his Bible. Personal lamentation isn't the only reason the OCB is quoted in the series at different points in time. Religious manipulation is a major factor as well. In the same book we just mentioned, Heretics of Dune, the Tleilaxu Mahai and Mashik Waf quotes the Gospel of John as part of a warped religious manifesto that aimed to warn against the errors of prescience. Called the Atreides Manifesto, this document claimed that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, a quote that was also a part of the Orange Catholic Bible. By this point in Dune's timeline, the religious order of the universe has been shaken upside down, with the OCB no longer holding a near monopoly over intergalactic faith, but its teachings are still being used to guide humanity. The opening section of the Gospel of John is focused on explaining to us what makes Jesus Christ the ultimate Messiah, different from Moses and more powerful as a consequence. In the beginning, there was only the Word of God that existed. God gave life to the universe through his light and visited his people many times, but not everyone received him. Those who did received his blessing and bore children of God, conceived not through the body, but through his word. Within this context, Jesus Christ was the Word of God made flesh within Mary's womb, which is why inexplicable births are still called immaculate conceptions. The Gospel of John focuses on the 7 miracles Christ performed in his life in an attempt to validate his nature as the Son of God. But in the Dune-iverse, this quote is used to refer to a different kind of divinity. Some might even call him the Antichrist based on his actions, but the Tleilaxu simply know him as God's prophet. This prophet was none other than Paul Atreides' son, the God Emperor Leto II. It was revealed in the final 2 Frank Herbert Dune books that the Tleilaxu's secret religion followed the language of Ilm and Fiqh. Theirs was a Zensuni faith, just like the Fremens, mixed with a hint of Zensufi teachings. The Tleilaxu worshipped the same god as the Fremen, and though they sought to assassinate both of their god's representatives, Paul and Leto, they came to recognize both men's work as God's brutal way of teaching. The Tleilaxu came to venerate Leto as a prophet of their god a millennium and 5 centuries after his death. This made them particularly susceptible to propaganda spread by an Atreides, which is exactly what the Atreides Manifesto was. It was a document that warned against the dangers of prescience and used the life of Muad'Dib and his descendants as irrevocable proof of the same. It used teachings from the Orange Catholic Bible and agendas that the Bene Gesserit wanted to plant within the human subconscious to create a thought weapon as powerful as the OCB. The Tleilaxu took the manifesto as the Word of God and proceeded to spread it throughout the known universe. Since they were the dominant power in this time period, it didn't take long for the Bene Gesserit propaganda to take root and ultimately aid them in destroying their enemies' plans. Frank Herbert always taught that blind faith can only lead to one outcome, and the Tleilaxu learnt that harsh lesson at the end of Heretics of Dune. Paul Atreides would learn that lesson as well, but only act on it after losing his sight and the love of his life. One of the chapters of Herbert's 3rd Dune novel, Children of Dune, begins with a passage from the Revised Orange Catholic Bible. It's eerily similar to Revelation 13:11, which talks about the beast of the earth. This beast is said to have the horns of a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It's identified as the false prophet of the devil, who compels humanity to worship the fallen angel's image and word, and bestows upon them his mark. In Children of Dune, this phrase has been amended to make the beast sound like a sandworm, which to us is a commentary on the nature of Atreides' prescience. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the sand, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, but his mouth was fanged and fiery as the dragon, and his body shimmered and burned with great heat, while it did hiss like a serpent. Dune is all about the desert world world, Arrakis, and its oppressed Fremen population. Frank Herbert used the Bedouins of the Middle East as one of his main inspirations, which is why Islam is such a huge influence on the Fremen culture, and indeed all of Dune. In the first novel, when Paul sets out on his journey with the Fremen, he thinks back on his Sirat and says to himself, "Paradise on my right, hell on my left, and the angel of death behind." This quote comes from the Hadith, where it's used with respect to the process of the final judgment. The Hadith says that on Judgment Day, after the dead have been resurrected, assembled, and judged by God, the saved and the damned now being clearly distinguished, the souls will traverse over hellfire via the bridge of Sirat. The faithful will move easily and swiftly across a broad path, led first of all by Muhammad and other leading lights of the community on their way to heaven. Those judged guilty of sin but still considered to be believers will fall from the bridge into hellfire, but remain there only for a limited period of purgation. Unbelievers, however, will find the bridge has become sharper than a sword and thinner than a hair. Darkness blinds their way. Their inevitable fall from the bridge will be an inescapable descent into their fiery destination of everlasting punishment. This quote couldn't be more appropriate for Paul, especially in the moment he says it, because he's an unbeliever trying to walk a believer's path. He was raised by a Bene Gesserit in the ways of the sisterhood. Since a young age, he'd been taught that religion was a tool, not a thing to be believed in. Timothy Chalamet's Paul Atreides might be inconsistent with his dislike of Bene Gesserit machinations and leaning into the Missionaria Protectiva, but Herbert's Paul knew what he was getting himself into. His decisions were not made to feel impulsive, but the philosophy behind those actions remains the same. Win or lose, the only thing Paul Atreides could not do was go back, because death awaited him on that path, so he could move forward in life and see whether his Sirat widens up in front of him or turns into a needle-thin bridge. Those of you who have read the books might know that once Paul takes the throne as their Mahdi and Emperor, the Fremen become disillusioned with him and themselves. Half of them follow Paul blindly, despite him changing aspects of their identity, while the other half plots to overthrow him. Blindness can take many forms other than the inability to see. Fanatics are often blinded in their thoughts. Leaders are often blinded in their hearts. Paul is a leader that inspires legions of fanatics dedicated to him, but neither gives him joy, pleasure, or peace. Paul himself ends up following Fremen tradition and walking into the desert after he was blinded, but not after doing everything he could to prevent that outcome fair. Paul's prescience had told him that his jihad, while brutal and unprecedented in its scale, was only a molecule compared to what would come should he embrace his great purpose fully. The golden path and the horrors that he would be forced to subject humanity through, coupled with the loss of his own humanity, made Paul ultimately abandon his own empire. He went into the desert hoping to die and finally get release from his burdens. But instead, he became a preacher that spoke out against his own empire. Paul resisted against Alia's rule as regent because he knew she'd succumb to possession. He generally recognized the error of his own ways. He tried to put humanity on a course he himself didn't want to tread, so now he'd do everything to rectify that. In this, he identifies himself as the false prophet because it'd be his son who grew the set required to force mankind's evolution. Leto II spent millennia as a monstrous tyrant, identified in Dune Prophecy as the herald of Tiran Arafel because he had the appetite to do what his father could not. That doesn't mean that Muad'Dib wasn't wise, because he took to the Orange Catholic Bible's teachings rather quickly after receiving one from Dr. Yui. When Paul gets his OCB the first time, he's told to read Kalima 467, which talks about how all life begins from water. This comes from the 21st chapter of the Quran, whose 30th verse begins the explanation of Allah's works. Spoken from the perspective of angels, it says, "Do the disbelievers not realize that the heavens and earth were once one mass when we split them apart, and we created from water every living thing? Will they not then believe?" It goes on to explain how the angels placed mountains on the earth so it wouldn't crumble to pieces, and how God made the sun and the moon and all things within the universe from water, even humans. This is an extremely important phrase in the Dune-iverse, because it's also a foundational belief of the Fremen, and Paul unwittingly uses it to gain favor with them. After defeating Jamis in a duel to the death, Paul initially refuses his water as part of his victory because he can't imagine such mutilation. To him, the Fremen are still alien, their customs still savage. Cheney is shocked at his refusal because to the Fremen, water is life, and refusing Jamis's water would be a great insult to his soul. After Jessica commands Paul to accept the water with her voice, he thinks back on Kalima 467, and Cheney takes it as another sign that he is the Lisan al-Khaib. The Fremen text Shah Nama records an eerily similar saying, which further cements Paul as the one that fulfills the Mahdi prophecy. It was a coincidence, and even Jessica was shocked that Paul knew that phrase because she never taught him the mysteries. But when fate is destined to play out a certain way, well, play out it shall. When Paul and Jessica are trudging through the desert trying to escape with their lives intact, Paul thinks back on one of the OCB verses that Gurney Halleck would have uttered to describe the Atreides' desire for vengeance. He quotes Ezekiel 30:12, "Only the Harkonnens are the despicable outsiders, and the Fremen the chosen people of God." Dune's desert landscape has caused many Bible verses to be adjusted to its environment. The chapter in Children of Dune, where Leto II meets his father after years of separation, begins with a quote from the book of Psalms. Psalms 74:13 and 14 say, "Thou didst break the sea in pieces by thy strength. Thou didst shatter the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Thou gavest him to be food to the folk inhabiting the wilderness." These verses in particular praise God to remind his followers of his strength, even though they've suffered through his absence for years now. In Dune, this quote is adapted and combined with the Revelations verse we mentioned earlier to create this profound warning. "Thou didst divide the sand by thy strength. Thou breakest the heads of the dragons in the desert. Yea, I behold thee as a beast coming up from the dunes. Thou hast the horns of the lamb, but thou speakest as the dragon." It's deeply ironic that the false prophet with the power of God is brought up in the chapter where Leto pretty much admonishes his father for not having the strength to put humanity on the golden path. He becomes the equivalent of God and Satan once he puts on his other skin, because no longer would he be human. Instead, he's a creature of prescience with firm command over a single thing, the golden path that sets humanity free through oppression. Leto plays God to become the prophet of a message that opposes his own, and it's rather impressive how well Frank Herbert layered that one into his own series lore. So is the fact that he turned God's blessing for the tribe of Zebulun into a warning about the exploitation of spice. In Genesis 49, Jacob blesses his son Zebulun with the haven of the sea. "He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon," said Jacob, and the blessing is later confirmed in Deuteronomy 33 by Moses. "Rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call the peoples to the mountain. They shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall partake of the abundance of the seas and of treasures hidden in the sand." That last phrase is uttered by Gurney Halleck in the first Dune book, when the Atreides learned just how much money the Harkonnens were pumping out of Arrakis during their time governing it. It later resurfaced in Heretics of Dune, where it became a part of a historical exhibit on the spice harvesters and other machinery used to mine melange on Arrakis. Herbert's twisting of Zebulun's gift of Galilee into a commentary on spice dependency is just one of the few ways in which he makes the biblical feel real. For millennia, the spice was the ultimate commodity in the universe. It controlled the economy, medicine, prescience, all of it, and he who controlled spice controlled the universe. It's only fitting that Paul Atreides ended up monopolizing spice production as his first major move once he became emperor, and his son Leto outright restricted its flow through the universe. Spice is everything in Dune, so calling it the treasure of the sand is more than just a little on the nose. The final two biblical quotes that find themselves directly integrated into the storyline come from the book of Exodus and the Gospel of Matthew, both being warnings in their own little way. The first is Exodus 22:13, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Superstitious? Yeah, we know, but the context within which it's used in Dune makes a lot of sense. The Kayam spy Essus Paimon says these words of Alia of the Knife in Children of Dune, when she turned into a full-fledged abomination. Alia was pre-born, fully aware of her ancestral memories within the womb and able to communicate with her mother from it as well. She was always under the threat of falling prey to a consciousness stronger than hers, because the ego memory contained thousands of ancestors. Any one of them powerful enough to override her untrained will could do so if she didn't resist. And while Alia did resist for a long time, eventually it was just too much for her. She became possessed by her grandfather, the Baron Vladimir, and when she heard Paimon had quoted that particular verse of the OCB in relation to her, she had him executed immediately. She kind of ended up proving his point, because Alia was alienating all the power brokers that Paul had brought together during his rule as emperor, all because she wasn't in control of her own sorcery. This quote can extend to the Bene Gesserit sisterhood in general, because they're often perceived to be sorceresses, and they certainly use their gifts to tamper with the natural flow of life. We suspect it's a quote we might see in prophecy as well, so we'd watch out for that if we were you. The final biblical quote that finds its place in the Orange Catholic Bible is Matthew 5, which says, "The meek shall inherit the earth." Part of the Beatitudes, it identifies the meek as one of the blessed people that shall find a place in the kingdom of heaven and become the inheritors of his legacy, the earth. But in Dune, it's a sad reminder of a people that were once fierce warriors. This quote from the OCB is remembered by a Duncan, Idaho Gola during God Emperor of Dune, who remembers what it was like fighting beside the Fremen. God Emperor of Dune is set 3,500 years after the death of Muad'Dib, and in that time, the Fremen have been transformed. Their ultimate desire for a green Arrakis has been achieved, because Leto II transformed the planet save for his Saria. Their constant requirement for struggling has come to an end, because one of their own rules is the god of the universe. The Fremen in God Emperor of Dune are relics of a distant past, performative at best, and are thus called the Museum Fremen. Duncan, Idaho is disgusted to see that the Fremen don't even use real still suits or crysknives anymore, and he wonders to himself if these shades of those warriors of old are supposed to be the meek that outweight them all and inherit the universe. He's moved to teach the Museum Fremen their true ways from his own memory, such as it was, and foster the spirit of those deceased fighters by aiding a rebellion against the God Emperor. Even a blessing can be turned into a curse by Herbert, and perhaps that's the greatest achievement of his Orange Catholic Bible. It forces his readers to think on the nature of religious teachings, even though they're as good as false and implanted within the human subconscious with one goal in mind: control. Though humanity won its freedom from the thinking machines, its collective consciousness needed to be steered away from the creation of such dependencies and forced to evolve. The commentaries that come along with the Orange Catholic Bible prove this truth, and also explain why several of the OCB's original quotes sound nothing like Scripture, but might as well be the wisdom contained within them. Original quotes and what the commentaries reveal about the true purpose of the OCB. The main reason for the creation of the Orange Catholic Bible, as the Commission of Ecumenical Translators saw it, was to answer all of humanity's burning questions with human intellect, instead of relying on external sources to do it for them. Over-reliance on thinking machines was seen as a consequence of religion being separated from the faculties of science. As such, the two needed to be unified, which is why the commentaries begin by saying, "Men, finding no answers to the Sanan, aka the 10,000 religious questions from the Shari'ah, now apply their own reasoning. All men seek to be enlightened. Religion is but the most ancient and honorable way in which men have striven to make sense out of God's universe. Scientists seek the lawfulness of events. It's the task of religion to fit man into this lawfulness. Mankind tried making sense of the universe's secrets the first time around by separating religion and science, but that nearly got it extinguished at the hands of the thinking machine. In order to ensure such a thing never happened again, their faith in the human mind and spirit needed to be empowered beyond measure and made instrumental to human evolution. By making religion the context through which science is viewed, the OCB attempted to eliminate the possibility of technology chafing against religion, and for the most part, it succeeded. You guys paid close attention to what was happening in the Harkonnen Command Center during Dune Part 2. You might have noticed that their mentats were chanting what appeared to be prayers constantly in an effort to maneuver their troops and machinery. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood often uses religious sayings and practices to spread their propaganda and influence in the universe, even though they privately deny such institutions. Still, by practicing the art of prana bindu, which are two separate concepts in real-life yogic traditions, they're able to make their bodies do things that can only be seen as either divine or technologically advanced. Once religion became the lens through which science brought order to the universe, it became impossible to separate it from law, because the commentaries tell us that when law and religious duty are one, your selfdom encloses the universe. It concludes with a statement that might seem shockingly optimistic for a series as insidious as Dune, but the true intention of Frank Herbert in creating this document through the Commission is reflected in its ending. Much that was called religion has carried an unconscious attitude of hostility toward life. True religion must teach that life is filled with joys pleasing to the eye of God, that knowledge without action is empty. All men must see that the teaching of religion by rules and rote is largely a hoax. The proper teaching is recognized with ease. You can know it without fail because it awakens within you that sensation which tells you this is something you've always known. He emphasizes the spiritual happiness that's associated with religion over the observation of customs is the true form of worship. All men seek knowledge and meaning, so if the religious institutions of the past haven't provided them with the answers, well, they must take matters into their own hands. But they must do so with the aim of procuring that mystical sense of euphoria that's associated with the hand of God placed on their shoulders, because life is full of joys, and religion should be a vehicle to experience that joy. The universe is God's. It's one thing, a wholeness against which all separations may be identified. Transient life, that self-aware and reasoning life which we call sentient, holds only fragile trusteeship on any portion of the wholeness. We're born, we live, and we die. Behold, O man, you can create life, you can destroy life, but lo, you have no choice but to experience life, and therein lies both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness. What time we have in this universe is finite. Not all humans can take on the Atlas-like burden that Leto II did. In the end, we're all temporary trustees of whatever belief system we choose to profess. But if there is one thing that can be achieved through faith, it's peace. Unifying progress and law with religious duty resulted in 10,000 years of tenuous peace for the Imperium. And in that, the Orange Catholic Bible was a massive success. But just like any other religious text, its wisdom was questioned by characters within the series, and none more than Paul Atreides. Muad'Dib wrote the Pillars of the Universe as his own commentary on the OCB and its commentaries. In it, he countered selected quotes with his own philosophy in order to drive his new Church of the Golden Elixir of Life. Where the OCB says law and religious duty cause your serfdom to enclose the universe, Muad'Dib said that if they are one, then the individual can never truly be a sole entity, because they'll always be part of a greater whole. He teaches that religion often partakes of the myth of progress that shields us from the terrors of an uncertain future. Muad'Dib takes the OCB's view on sin, which states that any can be ascribed, at least in part, to a natural bad tendency that's an extenuating circumstance acceptable to God, and identifies children, untrained people, ignorant people, and the mentally disturbed as the only ones worthy of relief. He says if these groups cause trouble, then it's the fault of the authority for not predicting and dealing with the issue, which is a rather cynical take, if you ask us. It amounts to constant surveillance in a way, but that isn't even it. The biggest OCB quote that Paul always ruminates over most is the one that relates to his prescience. There are many degrees of sight and many degrees of blindness. Think you of the fact that a deaf person cannot hear? Then what deafness may we not all possess? What senses do we lack that we cannot see and cannot hear another world all around us? This quote was debuted alongside the OCB when Dr. Yui handed a copy to Paul, freaked out that he chose to read his captured wife's favorite passage. In many ways, it relates to Paul's prescient abilities. As the Kwisatz Haderach, he can hear what others cannot, see what is unseen. He possesses the sense to perceive the worlds that surround his, to navigate through the threads combining them and leading humanity down a path where he was herald and shepherd both. He first thinks on this verse when he leads his mother through a desert storm and survives long enough to be found by Stilgar. At that time, Paul's prescience and Bene Gesserit training allows the mother-son duo to navigate an ornithopter through an Arrakis desert storm, which was more like a wall of angry sand. Once he becomes determined to see them to safety, no matter what, Paul semi-commits to his prescience by remembering Wanna's passage. He recalls it once again in the next book, Dune Messiah, when he rules as Emperor of the Universe. The context has been drastically altered. In that book, he recalls the passage when he looks at the Gola of Duncan, Idaho, called Hate. Paul suspects that the Gola has been programmed with some sort of secret mission by its Tleilaxu masters, and is reluctant in using its help as a mentat first. He's also disturbed by the fact that his friend's flesh and memory have been revived like this, especially with metallic eyes that always remind him of his differences from Duncan. But despite suspecting all this, Duncan doesn't give him any reason to believe he's disloyal to the Atreides. He even helps Paul punk Gaius Helen Mohiam by aiding in his suggestion to artificially inseminate Irulan with the former seed, which is why Paul thinks on that quote in the first place. He wonders throughout the chapter just how far his sister's prescience goes in comparison to his own, and once he determines her limitations, he wonders about his own. He knows that the Tleilaxu have tampered with Hate in some way, but he doesn't find out until it's too late. What was supposed to be a hopeful message about prescience becomes Paul's biblical curse, because he's too fixated on his own personal freedom to think of anything else. At that point in time, he was the only one who knew what having a mind open to the entire flow of space and time felt like. His godlike power defied every tenet set within the OCB, but like any wise ruler, he chose to question the parts that worked against him and adopt the parts that didn't. In the end, the Orange Catholic Bible became an instrument of control as opposed to the document of liberation that the ecumenical translators wanted it to be. But for centuries, it did provide humanity with stability and important lessons about life. The Brian Herbert books contain 3 verses from the OCB that are very relevant to the overall nature of what humans expect from divinity and themselves. Beware the seeds you sow and the crops you reap. Do not curse God for the punishment you inflict upon yourself. This is an excellent commentary on taking accountability for one's actions and emotions, which makes it all the more shocking that it was in the extended Dune-iverse. B.H. wrote that fate and hope only rarely speak the same language, and we think that's because they're missing the important link called action. Knowledge is pitiless. To know is to have information that can spur you to action or drive you into inaction. The latter is often perceived as being worse than evil in the Dune-iverse, and indeed the real world these days. The point of telling you guys all of this is that despite being created with the intention of unifying humanity into some sort of religious hive mind, the Orange Catholic Bible still had its obvious rigidity and flaws, which make it just like any other religious doctrine in the world. By having a character like Muad'Dib, who himself is subject of a religion he didn't want, Frank added layers of philosophy that are typically missing from science fiction. His discussion of the human spirit and all the religions that attempt to make sense of it are the USP of the Dune franchise, if you ask us. And under that lens, the Orange Catholic Bible has to be his greatest accomplishment. It informed the way of life for dozens of human generations, and did so by fusing religious duty, science, and law into one harmonious thing. For over 10,000 years, it kept the citizens of the Imperium in line, even though it bred fanatics like Dorothea and Emmeline. But even the OCB was no indestructible monolith. In time, it too was replaced by doctrines that either built upon its teachings or sought to eradicate it in an attempt to free humanity. Does the Orange Catholic Bible survive through the entire timeline of Dune? Technically, the Orange Catholic Bible doesn't even survive through the entire timeline of the first novel, because the moment Paul assumes the role of Mahdi, a new religion is born based around him, Dune Messiah. This religion is called the Church of the Golden Elixir of Life, and it's governed by a body of fanatics dedicated to Paul called the Kizzaret. And Paul himself produced many religious texts fusing ancient faiths with his own teachings to indoctrinate his universe with. The pillars became his personal Bible, and the Kizzaret is clergy. Muad'Dib's religion fused Fremen's and Sunni faith with the OCB and other religions, but focused it through the lens of Paul's prescience. His sister Alia was revered as a saint of this religion, and it lasted well into her regency following Paul's abdication. Once Alia was deposed by Paul's son Leto II, the pillars of the universe were replaced by the ever-crushing presence of the God Emperor, who attained divine status through his worm physiology. Leto leveraged the divine status of Muad'Dib and placed himself above the Mahdi, because he saw what his father couldn't, and he lived in the past, present, and future at all times. After Leto's millennia-spanning rule, humanity burst into the universe with the scattering and returned by the time Heretics of Dune picks up events, but the Orange Catholic Bible's teachings are still relevant. The Atreides Manifesto, which we mentioned earlier in the video, is based on the OCB and the life of Muad'Dib and his descendants. It warns against prescience, and in doing so, ironically achieves the goal that the original OCB set out to accomplish. The Atreides Manifesto ensures that the fate of the universe wouldn't fall into controlling oppressive hands by facilitating the destruction of Arrakis and the death of sandworms for the second of a few times in the series. Frank Herbert's final book is set over 5,000 years after Paul Atreides' lifetime, and though the OCB doesn't exist in its original form, its words permeate the very subconscious of the known universe. So profound was its impact that it endured thousands of years after its original words were written on Earth before its destruction. And for a guy that wrote his entire franchise to warn against the dangers of religion and charismatic leaders, we think that's damn spiritual. Marvelous verdict. Unfortunately, that's all the time we can spend on this history lesson, because that's all we've got for you guys. The Orange Catholic Bible is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Dune-iverse, and with good cause. It's like Shinbutsu Shugo, but on a universal scale, and involving a lot more religions than Shintoism and Buddhism. We hope we've done Frank Herbert's genius even a modicum of justice with our dissection of it, and we're looking forward to your thoughts on the same. Let us know what you think down in the comments section, and if you liked our comprehensive breakdown of the Orange Catholic Bible and its role in the Dune-iverse, then you might consider dropping us a like, sharing this video with your friends, and subscribing to our channel. We'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, don't forget, long live the fighters. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.